What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
And our guest this week on Educate Everyone is Gina Lee. She's an independent college counselor helping U.S. and international students find best fit colleges. A former director of college counseling, she guides students to craft authentic stories and pursue their goals with confidence. Now here's Gina Lee and Dr. Atman.
So, Gina, thanks for being with us. As a college counselor, you kind of are in a unique space to try and do best by the individual and yet still navigate what it is that colleges as an institution are looking for. And yet the institution is so large that it kind of overrides and vetoes and kind of snuffs out that individuality that you're trying to foster amongst students. So tell us a little bit about you. Tell us about your approach. Tell us about that process.
I've been in the college admission space for about 12 and a half years, and I think I have a unique positioning because I did not come from education. I came from the business side. So I started off my career after college in global marketing or international marketing abroad. And then I came to New York City and I was in the advertising world as a marketer. That shifted as I had my children and I went and volunteered on education boards. And then I just recently left as a strategic board committee member of a private school in this area, in the area that I'm at. So my background is business as well as education from the board level. And I also was on another board of Mandarin immersion programs and looking at that too. So it was always about sustainability and looking at how do you become marketable in this world. And I think that has a lot of impact on the way I approach my college admissions business. I also came from working at an international boarding school. The way I would describe it is like a lab school. It was a startup school in downtown LA with very unique opportunities to partner with like Coburn Academy and then these other companies that work with actors. And we had global studies in our program and the students that came from all over the world. We had students from Vietnam, Korea, Poland, Russia, Botswana, South Africa. We had students from all over the world, which meant that I get to really see the world from a different vantage point. And because I have sort of a different angle rather than coming up as a teacher, not that they have a great angle as well, but mine was just different. It was more about who are you going to be and who are you going to become. And when I was working at international boarding school, we had to look at our students because we were more than just teachers. We were there as mentors as well to look at the whole student and how do we provide experiences and create an environment where they're going to thrive. And I've noticed a couple of things. We had one particular student who was from suburban Las Vegas. She took a chance and said, I'm just going to go to LA and started a boarding school. She said, Mrs. Lee, if I did not come to AUP prep school, I would have never become the person I am today. And she was really into working with people that were sex trafficked. So she was a suburban girl from Las Vegas who really started becoming who she was when she started looking at the problems of the world. And one of them was sex trafficking. And then she started looking at India, and then she started looking at LA. Eventually, she worked with some USC grad students to provide a documentary on that. And when that happened, it really triggered something inside of me, which meant that if you give the students the right reasons to find their calling, to find their purpose, and do very meaningful, purposeful things, then they will be thriving and they will live into who they are. And that's sort of my own business, is really about taking students where they're at, figuring out who they are by many different levels. And one of them is like their interest, their skill level, their social capital, their cultural fluency, their intellectual level, and then most of all, whether they have this hunger and desire to become something bigger than themselves. So I think in our conversation before we were on this recording this, we were talking about how do you get students to really look at who they are and who they're becoming. And I shared that it starts with questions about themselves. And if you give a student time, 1 hour of your time, and you begin with building trust and safety, meaning they're so amped up with anxiety. They're so amped up with how do I look to others? What's the right answer I need to give Mrs. Lee? Once I break that down and say, hey, you're not here to impress me. I'm here to really study you and help you study yourself and help you understand yourself. Once I get their trust and their anxiety levels down, they're able to answer questions that are authentically, genuinely coming from their interests, their likes, their aspirations. And it's all in the question. I'm sure you know, Joe, because you do a lot of these podcasts. It's a lot of it's like getting people to talk about themselves and then asking them questions to kind of shape their conversation so that they realize who they are, what their goals are. And it can start as young as like any age. If you ask them, what do you spend a lot of time doing? What are the questions you want to ask? And I know we talked about the fact that for pretty much almost all of my students, I'm the first one asking them these questions, which is crazy, but I am. Because at school, they have to do so many things, so many classes, so many activities, they believe, that they don't have time to reflect and think about who they are and who they want to be. I feel like that's my role as a counselor who wants to bring out their most authentic self, and that's what I'm all about.
You were saying before about how you've got some students, or in the past anyways, who are taking gobs of AP classes all at once. What benefit is that really, especially when, given the way our education system is structured, that it doesn't build on itself? You can take a class, then forget everything that you learned, because you're just taking the class to get it on the transcript so you can get the A, so you can get the grade, the GPA, and that all feeds in. And it all feeds into this cycle and system that really only cares about hitting its own marks, that the system itself is satisfied, and cares nothing for that individuality and that uniqueness that people bring forth from themselves, but bring into that system itself. And so the system is just so large, right? The institution is so large that it can't get out of its own way. And that's not to say that the people within the institution don't want critical thinkers, that they don't want individuals, that they don't care. They do. It's just the system itself, that institution. It's so big. It's its own monster that is like a giant bureaucracy, just can't really do anything because it's set itself up for folks to adhere to certain standards, certain principles. And so again, I think you're in a unique and a difficult spot, given that you're trying to nurture those human beings that are coming to you, and yet you also have to appease the beast of the institution that you're trying to merge them with.
It's so true. But rather in terms of trying to figure out how to navigate through that, I deal with a lot of schools. I've worked with, I would say, 100 different schools by now, maybe even more. I'm not sure anymore. But I think it depends on the school. And so you have public schools, charter schools, independent school, Catholic schools, and that's where we start as a college admissions counselor, is to look at the types of schools that my student is in, and that is the structure of it. I will say I'm not happy about some of these charter schools, or even public schools, in some public schools within schools, and this is not a blanket statement, but it's a big part of it. Some of these schools are dropping enrollment. And so the way that they're hoping to increase enrollment is to specialize. I think they put students in a position of failure. So one of the charter schools I work with, we have freshmen taking 2 AP classes. By the time they're done, it's like 16, 17 AP classes, which is ridiculous. They never get a chance to really think because you're always teaching to the test. So you've got those systems. And within those systems, we look at what can we do to pull out, tease out topics that they're studying in school and taking that and going a little deeper. So my strategy could be very different in those type of schools versus, let's say, schools that give way more leeway where they don't even have a lot of AP classes. And I kind of tend to like those type of schools. They happen to be prep school classes. Not everyone has access to those kind of schools. Those schools actually can be very beneficial. However, with grade inflation being the way they are, all these universities are looking at ways to standardize where the levels of students are. So then we're looking at, different kinds of math competition tests. We're looking at math Olympiad, science Olympiad. We're looking at language assessments because those types of examinations standardizes a student's curriculum, so to speak, of their level. And then there's another part of this, which is, I would say, the more anxiety-fueled thing. So if a student goes to a prep school that doesn't have APs, a lot of these prep schools still offer the AP exam. Imagine that, Joe. They're studying because they love the topic, but then at the end of the day, they're going to tutors to get tutored to take AP test, which is ridiculous. So there's this vicious cycle happening, and I don't know how to break that, honestly, as a college counselor. I mean, I've looked at it from a prep school point of view, and I've been on the board for public school at some point, but it's such a machine that I don't know how to break it up. The worst case scenario was one school district, they specialize in math. Freshman year, I had a student take BC Calc at freshman year, because they were doing everything else in middle school. Well, what happens is they really don't have any depth to their math skills. So they might have gotten even a 5 on BC Calc 9th grade, but I'm finding through working with them through SAT, ACT, well, I'm not doing that, but with my partners who are working with them standardized testing or any other things that they have huge gaping holes in geometry or huge gaping holes in Algebra 2. So they literally have to go back and study those points. Not complete. Right. So what does that say? It's all about the marketing. They want these people to enroll in this public school that specialize in math, but the students are really not thriving. And so to me, that is just a travesty of what's happening because of enrollment numbers dipping. So these school districts have to do these things. I get that, but we're really not doing a service to our students by doing things like that, whether you're doing 15 APs or, considered, oh my goodness, she's doing BC Calc at freshman year. I don't think that's helping anybody to do that.
Just for clarity, so what you're seeing is that frequently, and this is more happening in charter schools than other places, is that charter schools are to attempt to combat certain things going on within their educational landscape or the demographics that they're targeting. They are trying to specialize, but then through that specialization, they're not providing a well-rounded education. Is that basically what you're seeing?
Yeah, and I want to include magnet schools. They're more magnet schools than charter schools. There could be charter schools too, but they're more magnet schools. So yes, they're thin in terms of what they say to students. It's broad and thin rather than being deep, right? And really understanding key concepts that are going to then show its rearing ugly head by the time they go to calculus. They're going to fail calculus, or they're going to fail college level math.
Whatever it is.
They just don't have it because it's great. I've had students where they're the top of the class and they can't write. They can't write cohesive, coherent sentences, and they're the top of the class. So that's where I'm really just baffled by that, but I understand why that happens. And so when I work with students, the grades matter, but they don't matter. Like, they matter because you got to get to their college, but I'm more concerned, are you going to survive once you get there? Because these things are happening.
Yeah. Well, but it's the same system in college, right? You still have to get grades, and so what you're up against is maybe, again, something flawed within the actual fabric of the way that we do education, period. that we're handing out grades. Possibly. We're just kind of talking about it and thinking out loud, but maybe that whole approach is something that, for some folks or for some institutions need to be rethunk, because I assume that with most things, the intention is good, right? Okay, we want to specialize in whatever it might be. This is right. But then if you're not providing the well-roundedness of a whole and complete education, then you're lacking there. On the flip side, if we're doing it in the traditional way where you have to take your social studies requirement and your English and your math and your science requirement and all that stuff, but kind of like what you were saying earlier, especially with AP or with students who are going after so many AP classes, you're just taking the classes to fulfill the requirements and you're not pursuing something you love, then that's a bit of a quandary also. So where's the balance? Right. What does that look like? How do we merge those two things and make sure that we're giving a well-rounded education to students, but at the same time fostering what it is that they love and who they want to be, not even just by the time they get to college, but beyond that. I don't know that I have an answer to that, but.
And we're talking in generalizations. There's always going to be, outliers for sure that are doing things really well. I can name you great schools that are doing a great job doing that. I think for my students, that's the first thing I try to tell them and show them is I know you think straight A's matters, and it does. The way you approach your school matters, but I'm looking at helping you figure out something more than that. All schools, no matter what, is seeking someone who's intellectually curious about something. And so that's the requirement that I have with my student is whether your school requires you to have a bazillion APs or they have none. If you work with me, I require you to really think about something that you are intellectually curious about. And that could be anything. That could be from something like bioethics to AI and ethics, something of that sort of these days, to how to make the best scrambled eggs possible. I know I'm being a little facetious there, but you can geek out on anything you want. And I'm like, just pick something. So, we're talking about personalized education. So in one sense, I'm like asking them to really look at pursuing something greater than where they're at. So go deeper into that. And so a lot of times what we'll do is either literally teach them how to teach themselves, or I'll walk them through, okay, so let's say you wanted to make scrambled eggs, the best scrambled eggs. How would you approach that? How are you going to learn? Because not only do you need these days to be able to pick something that you really are interested in, but you have to know how to use the resources that you have. And I always go, in this point in day and age, you have the most resources that any person could ever have in the history of mankind. So if you tell me, I don't know, Mrs. Lee, that is not an excuse, because there is a way. And let's think things out. And so part of my role, which is probably a little bit different than a lot of college admissions advisors, is that I try to make them think along the process of getting that answer. Because my goal is, personally, this is why I got into the business I am involved in, is because I want to make a difference so that these students are ready for a lifetime of growing and changing and shifting careers. So if I can teach them that they need to learn how to teach themselves, that education is not at the beck and call of their teachers. Everyone's going to have a horrible teacher. Everyone's going to have a horrible boss. It's what you do with it. And you have to learn how to study, how to get that information, how to work with people. So that's part of where I get to spend my time talking to my students. As I say, if you're going to work with me, you're going to pick at least one intellectually curious topic, and then we're going to talk about how do you get deeper? What do you do? How do you provide evidence for that? And these are the questions I think we talked about. Like, no one really will ask them those questions. They might do it here and there as get some tools. I'm not saying all the teachers, they don't make a difference. Of course they make a difference. But I feel like my students don't know how to sometimes apply that to themselves. They just check off in a box. Okay, I did those chapters in English, but I hate English, Mrs. Lee, but I know I have to get the A so I can get to college. And I'll talk about, well, why do you hate English? Talk to me about that. And then sooner or later, I try to show them, well, that English topic is called context. You're learning about someone's life, which you can take apart and then do it in your own life. Did you notice it's nature versus nurture? Did you notice that your covering is in and out concepts of tribalism? So we have these conversations as I'm talking to them about what they're interested in and getting them to the next thing that they have to do. And through that, they're gaining some skill sets that they're going to take for life that is going to still apply to college admissions when they get ready to tell their narrative.
But again, like how sad, what a sad commentary on the education system in general, that you have to be the one frequently who's asking them these sorts of questions, often for the first time, that students are being confronted with those kinds of things. And yet again, the teachers, they're hemmed in by having to adhere to the system also. So everybody's just sort of trapped and enraptured by this whole institution and the parameters that compose it. So I think it's a really difficult thing that everyone is up against. Everyone who's a part of that system has to pay the piper, so to speak, in some way or another. But at what cost? Because so much of what education should be about is not being looked at or given its due. And yet at the same time, it's kind of, again, that quandary that we spoke of a couple of minutes ago with you want a well-rounded student, you want a well-rounded human out there in the world, with that well-roundedness hopefully coming from some sort of integration between the general ethics and the morals and those values that are instilled. And I think that starts, generally speaking, at home, but there should be some intertwining of that within the education system that from what I've gathered doing this for the last couple of decades now, is that those kinds of things are just not talked about and are often actually even taboo within the educational system at primary and secondary levels. So there's not much of a compass for students to go off of so far as those things are concerned. And like you said earlier, they're too busy anyways trying to keep up with all the requirements that are impressed upon them from that weighty sort of space that the education system just demands. So there's a lot to unpack. And I don't know that it's navigable given the way that we do education from A to Z, really. Because again, like we also said earlier, once you get to college, you mentioned you're still worried about some students because they still have to get that grade and succeed in that particular environment. So again, you're kind of in this position of placing them in the best position for them to succeed. And I think that's, as parents, as guardians, as stewards, as educators, that's what we're always trying to do for our population, for the people under our stewardship. We're just trying to place them in the best possible situations. And yet, how can we possibly do that if the institutions or that world that we're giving them over to requires something totally different of them? So there's got to be a balance in there somewhere, but I'm not sure that it can really find its level given the current way that we go about doing the business of education as we have traditionally for the last 100 or so years. So I don't know. But that's why primarily we're talking now.
There's that story where there's hundreds of starfish on the sand on a beach.
I know this.
And someone says, well, they're all going to die.
Why are you doing that?
The person picks a starfish up and throws it in the sea and says, not that one, not that one. Unfortunately, that's the position I feel like I'm in, where I am saying you can absolutely navigate this if you decide to. That there is, so I think for many times, like, I'm thinking about my student I had a conversation with just yesterday. I do this thing called academic storyboarding, where I start with the spark that a student has on a particular topic, and then that starts the why is this happening, what is happening, and then what if this other thing happens. And it's the start of intellectual curiosity, of whys, and then how to problem solve, and then trying it and understanding what it takes to problem solve. So if you start with the genesis, that lends itself to something else because you're trying solutions. Are you realizing in order for me to create a solution to this, I need to go learn that particular skill? So if it's storytelling, I need to learn how to podcast, or I need to learn how to do video. I need to know how to do Canva. I need to know how to do social media with SEO. So they have now a purpose to why they're doing something because they want to continue to ask this question that's an issue that they are concerned about. So this journey, and I literally have them storyboard that. And as they storyboard that, you will find that they start to understand that the difference between you and Mrs. Lee or Joe is the in-between reasons of like your insights that you gained about yourself, the reflections you gained about what you enjoy, what you're really good at, where you want to go next to go grab things and learn things. So I feel like if we can get our students to do, maybe it's more project-based learning, for instance, to do these points of investigation where they're looking through this line of looking at wicked problems, these problems that they're really interested in, they care about, that's when they get turned on. And even that helps a lot because they look at their reasoning of why they want to do well at school. We only have X number of hours per day, right?
They find their purpose.
They find their purpose. And I feel like that's what we need to do is like we need to instill that sense of purpose that they matter. Because I have students who do advocacy and they see that their advocacy, for instance, I have a student that's doing hospice care and she was really upset because her grandfather did not get the things that he needed as hospice center. And then she does research and she realizes it's not even them themselves, it's the system. So then she starts to look at other countries that are doing hospice. And then that leads to public policy changes that she wants to be a part of. That journey came because there's something personal that happened to her that was a problem. And that's what carried her all the way through her journey. And then in that process, she is taking these classes, those magnet schools where she's going to end up with probably 15 APs, but she's using the skill sets that she's gained through doing that much reading and writing and pumping things out, as well as her debate, all the skills that she's gained in debate to push that advocacy piece all the way through. So she's what I call turned on. She's got the spark and she's been turning on. And so she's very much ready for college. So I feel like it has to do with that beginning part, that spark, no matter what school system you're in. And that's what's missing. And you'll find that some students have it and it's evergreen. It's from the beginning of time. If you ask a student, what do you remember? It's usually that one teacher, you're right, in high school. Yep. Maybe if you look at your own high school experiences, that one teacher that really cared about them and turned something on and said, what do you care about? And do a lot of that. And that spark does something to the student.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. Reading comprehension doesn't start when the book opens. It starts before. Before reading, ask your child what they think the story or chapter will be about. During reading, pause once or twice to check in and ask what's happening so far. After reading, ask them to summarize the main idea in their own words. This simple 3-step routine turns reading into an active process instead of a passive one. It helps students understand, remember, and actually enjoy what they read. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Joe, last time when we talked, we were talking about why human beings always are trying to become something. So why?
That's a good question. Why? And again, it's just another overarching theme through all of these little segments that we're talking about a philosophical war. Is why is there this lack of harmony within human being and the world? Or it's an apparent lack of harmony. And really this is something within all of us. And that isn't to say that there aren't super happy and super content people. Absolutely, for sure. But we're all kind of striving towards that. And I think by and large, the goal, this is certainly something that's reflected in a lot of Eastern religions or just religions sort of in general, is being more or less, I don't want to say unaffected by the external world, but to be affected through a process of learning from that, gaining something and then moving beyond it in a way, but still maybe carrying it with you. Again, having learned something from it, but then ultimately kind of actually being unaffected by it. Still maintaining your center, still maintaining who you are, but again, learning, growing, becoming all the more because of it. Then again, that harkens back to a question that normally would just be glossed over here. Why do we need to learn from experience in the first place? Why is it that we don't have immediate connection to things? If we need to learn something, does that mean that we've forgotten it? Because generally speaking, if the answer is out there, if there's something to be gained and attained through an experience, doesn't that mean that it was always already there in the first place and we're just now catching up to it? It's a very, very interesting kind of question. And it's one, again, that is usually and generally glossed over by folks, is that we talked previously about, is there something that originally human being as a being itself was that we've lost that we're trying to get back? Is that really more the direction that we're actually going through, again, quote unquote, learning via experience, learning via our own existential state here in the world and who we are and what we become because of our experiences? The operative word there being become, because if we are becoming something, that means that, again, we're striving towards something that we previously weren't, but now are trying to get to, but there is a place to arrive at. Doesn't that mean that at some point that was always out there for us and that, again, we just kind of caught up with it? It's an abstract thought, but make it tangible for yourself and you'll see that it actually is a very, very interesting question. Then again goes back to something we talked about previously. Are we putting too much emphasis on the physical nature of the universe, our experience within the physical nature, and the linear perspective that we attribute to time? Just take, for example, your thought of yourself right now. Who you think of yourself as you are right now, whatever that image of you is, do you think that you're that same person that you were a year ago, or better yet, when you were 7 years old, right? I mean, yeah, same person, but you were evolving into this thing that you actually always were. So what does that mean? And not just for yourself as an individual, but for consciousness itself. Again, giant questions that are underlining really pretty much everything that we know, think, do, observe, encounter, interact with at every stage of our lives and of our conscious experience and of our experience in general. And they're things that we don't really think about because it's almost like it's the trees of the forest. We're just seeing trees, don't realize that we're actually in this giant forest, a thought forest, a conscious forest, an experiential forest, as it were. So these are things that, again, we do have to kind of surgically extract if you want to be really, really good at seeing what is actually there and why.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.